Alrighty, so thanks for you out there that submitted your questions via Twitter for this Q&A. In particular, those of you that tweeted your weekly fantasy football questions. Let's get right into this. I'll start off with the non-fantasy football questions first, get those out of the way, and then we'll go on to the rest of the Q&A, which will be all about fantasy questions. Omer H82 asked, you said a team should build through the draft. How should they fix how well they do in the draft? First thing is to prioritize it and emphasize it. Second thing is to not trade away draft picks for veteran washed up players when your team is in clear need of rebuild. A team like the Oakland Raiders, who in recent years have traded away first round picks for the likes of Richard Seymour and Carson Palmer. That's not helping anything. You were nowhere near being a contending team. Why the hell would you trade away a first round pick that, by and large, you probably would have screwed up anyways? To be fair, to sit there and do that, it makes no sense to me. You also have to have a system and infrastructure in place, in my opinion. You have to know what you're going to run on offense, what you're going to run on defense. You have to know what personnel and what players are going to fit into those areas. I mean, you need to find quality football people. You need that guy with the leadership and vision at the top. There's a lot of different things. His other question, if Davis shit cans Allen and McKenzie, who in your opinion should you replace them with, if and why? I don't know. Good question. I'll probably have a better answer for you as the season goes along. But yeah, it's not looking good for both of them to survive this season. That's for sure. Ferminator asked, thoughts on Ryan Tannehill and the Miami Dolphins as a whole? I'm a fan of Tannehill. I was a fan of Tannehill heading into the draft. And remember, I was one that actually sat there and rated Tannehill as my number one quarterback, not Andrew Luck. Some people say that's crazy, but to be fair, we're still only in year number 3, and I don't think Tannehill quite has the help around him that an Andrew Luck does. But I like Tannehill's combination of skill sets. I like his arm, his mobility. I'm not sure if I've seen him possess that or demonstrate that special trait or characteristic yet. And I'm not sure if the Miami Dolphins have given him enough help yet. As far as the Miami Dolphins as a whole, their defense is solid. They're a team that can run the ball. They've got some weapons on the outside, but you wouldn't really have anything to say write home about. It's kind of the Dolphins just kind of go under the radar a little bit, and I think Tannehill a little bit goes under the radar. Man God 45, do you think Skip Bayless is the biggest dumbass at ESPN? Depends on how you define dumbass. The guy says incredibly stupid things and has for years, knowing they're incredibly stupid things, and continues to find jobs and gets paid a healthy salary to do so. So, from one hand, you might look at him and say he's the biggest dumbass at ESPN, and on the flip side, you might say he's the smartest guy at ESPN. Just throwing that out there. So now let's move on to the fantasy football questions. Joe Novak Jr., Sean Green, or Asiata this week? Well, the Patriots got torched by Moreno for over 130 yards in week 1, and Asiata is going to take over for AP from Minnesota this week. But what I saw out of Asiata last year, if he didn't get goal line carries, he really wasn't much. He definitely wasn't anything special. Sean Green, it looks like McCluster and Sankey will get some carries as well, even though Sean Green at this point will still be the primary ball carrier. Green is one of those players that he has to score a touchdown in order for him to have any real value. In terms of the matchups, I might like Sean Green's matchup just a little bit better going against Dallas. So that might be the way I would lean, but it's very close. EM, Ale, MDY, please. Should I start Cordero Patterson over Demaryius Thomas since Thomas didn't get much action last week? No! No! You took Demaryius Thomas for a reason as high as you did, most likely in the first round. We're only a week into the season. You're already considering benching him for a guy like Cordero Patterson, who you took probably somewhere between the 5th to 7th rounds. This is madness. Complete madness. You go with the better player. You go with the bigger star, especially this early on in the season, especially if healthy. Demaryius Thomas, not even close. Because let's face it, if Cordero Patterson doesn't have that huge touchdown run last week, He really didn't do much else. He's still not targeted or utilized very well or much at all, frankly, in the Vikings passing game. So, I mean, his scoring primarily came off of one run as a wide receiver. Start Demaryius Thomas. Don't be ridiculous to yourself, especially this early in the season. Right wielder 259. I can only start 2 of these 4 running backs. They are McCoy, Stacy, Martin, and Sproles. Who starts and who sits? Okay, similar to Demaryius Thomas. LaShawn McCoy, who you either took with the first or second overall pick in your draft, more likely than not. He starts every week he is healthy. Got it? Good. And I don't say this to be an ass, but I say this because we need to think about these things. You took these people this high for a reason. Demaryius Thomas is not a scrub. He is going to produce big numbers. LaShawn McCoy is not a scrub. Screw the matchups or anything else. You took him in the first round for a reason. He's your franchise fantasy football player. You play him every single week. As far as your other 3, though, who's the one to start? You got Stacy going against Tampa Bay. You've got Martin going against St. Louis and Sproles going against the Colts. I'd probably bench Sproles because, again, his role is somewhat limited. So you're really hoping that he's going to score a receiving touchdown, basically. He's not going to score one on the ground, more likely than not. Now, if you're in a PPR league and you're confident that Sproles is going to get 6 to 8 catches, then I might say you feel somewhat safe going with Sproles. But out of the 2, we're not sure about Doug Martin's health. I probably would go with Zach Stacy at this point. But I don't feel great about that. Vonnie Quest. If a player is questionable in your lineup and is a game time decision, do you take a risk and start them anyways? Depends on the player. It depends on the situation. And frankly, if you have things set up properly and it's an early game, like the 1 o'clock Eastern games on Sundays, if he's a game time decision, then you can keep him in the lineup until the last few minutes when you find out for sure. Because usually within a half hour of the game, you're actually going to know who could play and not. So in that point in time, it's okay to leave him in there until the last possible second. If it's an afternoon game, Sunday night game, Monday night game, and you really don't have a good feeling about it, maybe it is better off to bench him. It's all about feel and what you want to do, honestly. Brian Smith NB, Zach Stacy, Noshawn Moreno, or Anquan Bolden for the flex position. I probably would go with Moreno. Moreno looked really good against the Patriots last week, again, over 130 yards rushing and a touchdown. He's going against a Bills team that is somewhat vulnerable against the run. Forte had a nice day against him on the ground. So out of the 3, I like the Moreno matchup the best. I'd probably say go with him. Bima the Cashman. Should I start DeAndre Hopkins or Reggie Wayne? Wayne's going against the Eagles, whose secondary is not great, and Hopkins is going against the Raiders, whose secondary is definitely not great. Yeah, Hopkins had a big, long touchdown catch last week, but really didn't have much else, honestly. So, yeah, he put up some points, but what did it really mean in the grand scheme of things when you look at the bigger picture? As far as Reggie Wayne, he is coming off of the knee injury, but he does have Andrew Luck as his quarterback. Would you rather trust in Andrew Luck getting the ball to Reggie Wayne or Ryan Fitzpatrick getting the ball to DeAndre Hopkins? I'd probably say go with Reggie Wayne this week because the matchups to me are somewhat similar. All right. Saving Ryan's privates. Who should I start at 1 wide receiver position and the flex out of Edelman, Garcon, Vincent Jackson, Doug Martin, Reggie Wayne, and Pierre Thomas? Edelman. Edelman would be the wide receiver for sure. And then in terms of the flex, and the reason I say Edelman, just in case you're wondering, is that even though the Vikings dominated the Rams last week, Brian Quick was still able to have almost 100 yards receiving against that Vikings secondary. So I think Edelman's facing a good to solid matchup here. In terms of your flex position player for this week, I'd say probably go with Vincent Jackson, but you don't have a lot of compelling options. Your other question, who will put up more fantasy points, Andy Dalton at home against the Falcons or Tom Brady on the road at Minnesota? It's an interesting question. I actually would feel more confident with Dalton going against the Falcons. I really would. Dalton is underrated in terms of his fantasy value. He was a top 10 fantasy quarterback last year. In some leagues, he'd be classified as top 5. He's a top 10 fantasy quarterback again this year, I assure you. Whereas Brady was just on the cusp of being top 10 last year. At this point in time, I like the matchup for Dalton against the Falcons a little bit better. Nate Rice, 1493. Since I won't have Adrian Peterson, should I go with his backup, Matt Asiata, or should I go with Sean Green? Okay, I already kind of answered this question. I might go with Sean Green. The other thing to keep in mind is if you're not really sure about AP and you think, maybe he'll play at some point, but he might get suspended later on in the season, maybe it would be wise if you don't have a lot on your bench anyways in a week or two to go with a flyer and maybe go with Jerick McKinnon, their third-round pick. I think he has more athleticism and more upside than an Asiata. And he could be the guy if Peterson was to miss extended time. So maybe a guy like Jerick McKinnon, the guy out of Georgia Southern, might be a guy to keep your eye on in the waiver wire in the weeks to come. One shot you die 55. Should I consider starting either Riley Cooper, Keenan Allen, and or Frank Gore? And you sent me a picture of your roster, and yeah, you're not great at running back. I'll say that much. I would not start Keenan Allen against the Seahawks this week just because you talk about even if he doesn't go against Richard Sherman a lot and he lines up, let's say, on the other side, that still means that the safety could rotate over and they can bracket coverage him quite a bit. And that's what they did with Jordan Nelson. Nelson got some yards, but they were able to keep him out of the end zone. And and then Riley Cooper against the Colts. Not a terrible play. But I think you might be okay in your lineup of wide receiver. I would probably consider starting Frank Gore against the Chicago Bears. I mean, the Bears can't stop anybody on the run. So you have to figure Frank Gore is going to have a decent day on the ground and probably will get some red zone opportunities and goal line opportunities with the ball. So I might consider starting Frank Gore according to your team and how it's set up. He would probably be the safest out of the three options at this point in time. So thanks to you guys that submitted your questions for this. I try to do these Q&As every Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday, and I usually fail to do so, but I keep trying to do them. So send me your NFL, send me your sports-related questions, and I look forward to answering them for you. Let's enjoy week number 2 of the 2014 NFL season. How about that?